Well, and Gerald, I want to follow up with the water issue. Um, why is there this effort to reestablish? What's behind the water rights issue?
That's a great question. Water rights in Whatcom County are a mess. There is no question about it. There's uncertainty. About 50% of the farmers since the 1970s have been told when they've needed to get a water right to go ahead and apply, and ecology will get around to issuing those legal water rights. Well, none of those have been issued. And it's not just farmers that are affected, but overall, you look at where water rights have been allocated, water rights are a mess. And so ecology has a good reason for wanting to get some certainty, and that's how they're selling it. But probably more significantly is tribal water rights are a federal issue. The tribes look to the federal government as its connecting point and its defender. But because these tribes have asked the state to basically insert their jurisdiction in this, the state is very, very pleased to be able to do that. That's an unusual situation. So the state's eagerness to, in effect, accede to this tribe's request is one of the things that's really driving it. So, you know, there's reason for ecology to do that, but but the process of doing that, which is probably a 30 to 40, possibly 50 year, you know, court process involving probably a $500 million of legal fees to go through this process, and the uncertainty that goes with that through that whole time will just be devastating. And we certainly saw that in Yakima. And right now we have negotiation processes that are in place with all the stakeholders involving water. But by ecology taking this action, they're pulling the rug out from under all those negotiations, when the lesson to be learned in Yakima is that ultimately it was resolved through the integrated water plan. So it was a negotiated process. We've talked to Jay Manning, who was the director of ecology at that time. He is strongly in favor of getting to a negotiated process right away. And that's, you know, everyone, I encourage you to learn about it. We've got a website up called fishneedfarms.org that has a lot of information on it. But again, this is one of the things, if the community comes together and sends a message to the state, we can really make a difference.
Well, and I think, you know, I know our WBA president is out there she's in quarantine, I believe, on some terrible place out far in the Western Pacific here, but I think she's on board. And I think WBA, listening to us today, is needs to talk and look to ways that we as a group could help assist in spreading the message and actually influencing.
That would be terrific.
I think it's an important opportunity here that we don't want to miss. And of course, that brings us over to some of these other areas that we've really got to take a look at. And Dr. Troutman, you've been analyzing these issues, and you mentioned in your presentation, your initial presentation, opportunity and things that we can do here in the future to improve the relations, and there will be changes in the border. What do you foresee as changes that are inbound towards border crossings and activities with trade and other things?
Yeah, well, one thing to remember right now with the restrictions as they are is they're were agreed upon bilaterally, but they're not the same in both directions. So I could get into that if people are interested in the Q&A of what's allowed to go into Canada, what's allowed to come into the United States, but we define essential in different ways, and we've applied those restrictions in different modes in different ways. So you can still fly to Canada or to the US from Canada at least, but you can't drive unless you fit within a certain category. So right now we're kind of in this patchwork period, and like I mentioned, I think when we have to come out of this, we can't leave the border restrictions in place forever, but how we come out of it is going to really have I think a huge impact on probably the next 10 years. I mean, if we look back to 9/11 and the way that we approached those policies, it took us a long time for Canada and the United States to get creative and get innovative and implement those policies on the border. The Nexus Trusted Traveler Program is a great example of what's now a fantastic policy that came out of those negotiations and actually originated here in the Pacific Northwest area. And so I think in some ways we're well positioned to continue to innovate on the border because we've been doing it in the past. And we were sort of, before even the border restrictions went in place and COVID-19 was on anybody's radar. I think the US and Canada were kind of on this cusp of entering a new era of border management, which was going to be much more data driven, whether that was facial verification or biometrics or different sort of ways of communicating the information that you need to communicate to the border officer in order to cross. So I think we can leverage this time and take some of that low-hanging fruit and say that, you know, not only do we have to maintain efficiency and security on the border, but now we got to incorporate this third leg, which is public safety and public health. So one example I'll throw out there, which I've been advocating for, is those of you who have enrolled in the Nexus program know that there's a long wait to get your interview, and then you have to get your interview and conduct it with both security agencies. And then you've got to wait and you get your card issued. Well, why are we conducting those interviews in person? Right now, we're all used to this virtual platform. There's Nexus, the Nexus offices are mostly closed in both countries. So there's this long backlog in this Trusted Traveler program. Well, we could be adjudicating those applications right now, doing that through Skype or another sort of virtual platform. And getting both governments to agree is going to be the challenge, because we're facing, obviously an election in the United States, which is soaking up the bandwidth of basically every agency within the federal government. And then you have Canada's approach right now, which is basically to say that the virus counts in the US are so much higher than they are here in Canada that we just want the border to remain restricted. And while that is all okay in the short term, and perhaps was smart back in March, we don't have a plan in place to lift those restrictions. They continue to be a 30-day extension with no real plan or metric surrounding when those restrictions could be eased. So, here in Washington State, we have these phases that are tied to certain public health metrics, but we don't have that on the border. It's a real void right now in both kind of the policy framework and the collaboration between the US and Canada to tackle that. But to point out the silver lining, there is a lot of great work that's been done. There's a lot of great work that's still being done. And there is sort of non-government agencies, private sector included, who are pushing for smarter and more innovative ways to manage our border when we come out of this, which will be really important for Whatcom County, because the more fluid that border is, the better it is for our economy in a lot of different ways.
We know in Blaine, our revenues, a significant portion of Blaine City revenues comes from the package stores and the 33 businesses there. But the other impact is also in our small businesses across the board, but specifically in restaurants. There's a lot of traffic that comes through there, and our small business and friends of ours that manage, people we know that manages the restaurants there, they're struggling. They're really, really struggling. That's been a big challenge, and of course that really, your industry and what you've been doing to try to deal with these COVID issues and setting in place policies to protect and protect that's got to be costly, and it had to be extensive, I'm sure. So can you discuss a little bit of that, what you had to do and how you've adjusted and what the impacts are both on your bottom line and your customers out there that are, purchasing from you?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Jim. I think I'm just going to touch on those things that haven't either already been touched on or I trust are fairly customary out there as far as measures that folks have taken. So the impacts for us have been fairly substantial financially because unfortunately we have too many employees to qualify for our industry class. And if you have over 500 for our industry class, you don't qualify. So the PPP for us, as Tom and his team at WAFED, who helped us through that process, we determined fairly early on that we just wouldn't qualify. That compounded with the mandate to continuously work as an essential industry to replenish the grocery store shelves, which if you remember back in the early days, the first 6-8 weeks, it was kind of like a ghost town on those shelves in most of the grocery stores. So we were working 24/7, and not only our crews in the plant and the production facilities and all of that, but our leadership team was right here in our offices working on process documentation, to establish COVID-19 policy, to make sure that safeguards were in place and that they were being adhered to very diligently. I think the media had us all, rightfully so, very frightened early on. I think that was probably maybe a little overreaction, but it actually worked to have us take this thing really seriously. And we're working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week as a leadership team to get everything in place, because we knew we couldn't go home and hide under the couch. We had to be here replenishing the nation's food supply. So with that came, here are some things that we did in addition to standard things that I think are being done, but we did ozone treatment, which turns oxygen it turns O2 into O3, and it essentially kills everything in that space. So we would vacate areas where employees would be throughout the day and evening shift. And usually between 1 and 3 a.m., we would hit that area, be it a locker room, restroom, lunchroom, dock office, loading dock, any area where people would be occupied. We hit those areas with ozone treatment, which is a heightened level of sanitation beyond the additional folks that we hired just to wipe surfaces down, doorknobs, hand railing, all those kinds of things. One of the things that our engineering and maintenance team came up with was a non-contact door openers, so that in the restrooms and lunchrooms and locker rooms, you could actually pass through an area while opening the door with your foot. You didn't need to touch surfaces all the time with your hands. And they changed the tumblers on our doors and had reclosers, spring-loaded reclosers installed if necessary, and then made it possible for those doors to open and close without touching them with your hands. We invested in an app for our employees early on that allowed us to, what we did is we purchased thermometers for every single one of our employees to have at home. Initially, we were checking the employees at the front gate with a temperature, which exposed the person checking every single one of the employees to that peril. But eventually we decided, hey, let's purchase thermometers for every single person. Let's send an automated text to their cell phone. We pay them for that use, actually, a small fee every month to cover their texting services. And that way if anyone is not feeling well, we catch them before they ever leave their house. They don't come in here to the place of work and run the risk of infecting others. That's worked very well. It shows up in my inbox on my text every morning at 5 a.m. It's basically 2 hours before you're supposed to come to work. I wish I could just come to work at 7. That'd be good. And then it comes 2 hours before the swing shift and 2 hours before the graveyard shift. So those folks get a chance to fill that out. They enter their employee number, they answer the wellness assessment test questions, and then they are free to come to work if they pass all of those things affirmatively. It's been several $100,000 that we've spent on complying with COVID. We did a number of things, and I would say that those measures that I just spoke of are really targeted towards the medical health of our employees, our customers, our on-site tenants, regulatory agents that visit here, any visitors, any vendors, anyone that comes into contact with us. We purchased and installed brand new external restrooms for the truck drivers. We set up iPad signing capabilities so that the truckers really didn't have to come inside and sign paperwork in the office. We actually took the iPads out to their truck door and had them do that. But those things are all directed towards the medical health of our population. We also invested quite heavily in the emotional health, which we think at this stage of the game may be just as important, if not more important, than the medical health side. And those things included thank you pay for every hour that a person could be at work in a healthy way. We gave them extra compensation for each hour that they could be here. We also did thank you lunches to thank those folks in a socially distanced way with box lunches from local vendors, trying to help local vendors just stay in business with several hundred lunches every week on Fridays. We always had Friday thank you lunches, and we're still doing that today. We did a bunch of swag and Cold Chain Warrior t-shirts and hats and all of those kinds of things. And I think the combination of all of those things together, we also purchased 6 20-foot containers, brand new ones, and put Nordstrom rolling racks in there. And the warehouse workers could put their freezer suits and their hats and gloves and boots and those things in the containers every night. And then our engineering team would come around and zap those containers with ozone to make sure that every day or every shift that they showed up, their clothing and their work gear was completely sterilized. I think all of those things together combined contributed to us weathering the emotional pitfalls that a company can experience with an employee base who gets emotional fatigue, quite frankly, if they're not being, paid attention to and stroked in the right way, in a sincere way, and with distancing but reasonably small group area meetings on a frequent basis, where they know that the work that they're doing is important, and that their being here when they're healthy is so much appreciated by certainly the company, but I'm sure by the community. And I think that went a long ways to try to bridge that gap on the emotional wellness side of things. I would also just kind of touch base back to the question that was posed to Gerald on labor. We've had a tough time during that first March, April, May, when we would normally staff up for our seasonal labor. It was difficult. I think one of the aspects that hadn't been talked about yet was that the first tranche of PPP that came out, and the unemployment compensation and the $600 check and all of those things contributed to making it more difficult to coax folks off the couch to come in and actually have a job with benefits and whatnot. Even though, as like Gerald said, our jobs are fairly well compensated with excellent benefits. It was just hard for us to attract that. So what we wound up doing is having our existing employees, in many cases, probably over 100 of them spent tremendous amounts of overtime, which is of course expensive, and it's fatiguing. Just because that's all we could do is just have people work more hours. So it was not uncommon during the busiest part of the year to work 2 12-hour shifts for everyone that we have on staff. I will say that I want to thank Laura for, on a middle management level, we hired 2 folks from Intalco that have been just excellent. One is a QA specialist, and she's doing great with us. In fact, I think she was Employee of the Month last month. And then another gentleman that is our plant superintendent down at the Stanwood facility, and they've just been excellent. So.
Well, Doug, one of our participants here said that they had done similar things that you've done, and that it was really valuable to have the WBA support and be able to have contacts and understanding what's happening there. And they wanted to thank you very much for that. And again, an example of what the WBA is here for, in order to help connect people and share information and be able to reach out for help in these circumstances. And of course, this is an amazingly challenging one. You've talked about emotional health, and I'm going to bounce really quick over to Laura, because my concern here is, I think your point in the beginning, no one really understood this virus, and there was a lot of concern of how much of an impact. The data, we've got significant increase in number of cases, but cases don't necessarily mean anything other than someone is testing positive, and we're doing over 130 million tests so far. Our death rate's declining significantly. At some point, we've got to get back to work, and we've got to understand that it is a virus, and it's pretty hard to manage. The impact that we are facing right now, we've been, 15 days to slow the spread, and then another 30 days, and now we're, months into this problem. And we are really, really damaging a lot of people. And what my concern is, more than anything else, it's the people on the lower end of the economic spectrum right now that are suffering the most, and those children that don't have the support at home, that don't have the resources that they need. And, Laura, just real quickly, talk about, what's happening in school right now as a school board member with the number of failures in class. We've almost 2 semesters, almost an entire year lost for education.
Yeah, so, this is, I think it's a good example of what does it mean to be in public policy. We talk about, doctors. As a doctor, as a physician, if you're caring for patients, your mandate is do no harm. You want to save absolutely everyone. But when you are in public health or public policy, you have to take the information that you have and look at the context of all the other impacts. There's a lot of ripples out there. And so, I say the same thing as being on the school board as an elected official. We have to take a look at all of this information that we have, and it's a lot of information, and it changes all the time. So taking that information and trying to figure out what can we impact, what can we affect, and what's sort of the priority here. And over time, at Blaine School District, we're a small school district. We're just over 2,000 students in our whole district. And when we first started this, we were not a technology school at all. And up here in the county, and I know across the county, that you've just accessibility to technology and to broadband is hard to come by. So overnight, having to pivot to be able to support students, when for the last couple of years that I've been on the school board, we have talked in depth about social and emotional learning and about our special needs kids, and how do we make sure that we're addressing those issues, and how are we supporting them with these wraparound services. And then overnight, apparently it didn't matter anymore. That conversation stopped immediately. And so for me, thinking, okay, well, we'll get through a couple of weeks, and then we need to get back to this and talk about how we're going to address those kids who are now at home, maybe in not the best situations, without access to internet or this online schooling. We have teachers who don't have access to internet. It was an upheaval. So we thought, well, we'll get through it. We'll get through the summer with a plan of how we were going to get the kids back into school. And really just at the 11th hour, the county health department came out and recommended against going back to in-person school. So then the discussion, a lot of discussion on what does recommend mean versus mandate. Well, in my mind, recommendation was not a mandate, and we should get the kids back in school. But it's taken a little bit longer. We are now in Blaine. We've got some of the kids back in school, but Doug, I think you talked about it as well. It can be difficult to encourage people who've been at home, whether they're students or teachers, to encourage them to come back into a workplace. We are moderating our return to school, mainly around, will the teachers come? Will they be there to support the kids? Will they come back to the classroom? And so, I think, Jim, you talked about the data, and the data is showing that the students themselves are at very low risk, if at any, particularly the young.
I just want to highlight to all the participants out there, if you're under the age of 25, you are 10 times more likely to die of suicide than you are from COVID right now. It's an unfortunate fact. And we have the kids that are in the most challenging environments and situations are being stuck in those environments without getting to an environment where they're communicating and having some oversight and some assistance and help. We're seeing a significant increase, people that we are in contact with behavioral health, significant increase in those issues. It's very damaging. And the number of people that are failing in the schools right now, kids, it's unbelievable having a challenge in our high school students.
Yeah, we're just seeing a large amount. I mean, almost half of the students who are failing a class. And whether it's for not being able to log in, for not having support in getting your stuff done, not being able to connect, whatever the reason is, we're seeing huge impacts. And this is, on the upper levels, it's kids who are failing classes. On the younger, levels, it's kids who are not learning how to read. So there's going to be really long lasting impacts to this. And it's multi-layered. I mean, I'm looking at all of you on this panel and I'm thinking that, in every sense, we are all impacted by it. Either we're parents or we're employers, or, we're in some way impacted by not having our children back in school. And it's, we're continuing to work on it. But it is, I think there's a question here too about childcare. Yeah, I mean, there is a childcare crisis. That we're having access to childcare. I mean, and it mixes all in with the accessibility to school. We have a lot of people wondering why you can have daycare, but you can't have school. Just a lot of inconsistency in rulemaking at this point. So, for us at our school district, you're just trying to peel back the layers and say, what's our first step and how are we going to make those first steps? And we talk about this a lot. We have, our superintendent and our building administrators talk daily. And, what's the contingency? How are we going to get the kids in? How do we rotate them through? I mean, Doug, you're talking about, your practices for COVID. I mean, we also are employers at a school district. So you got to think about how do you screen the teachers? How do you screen the kids? I mean, it's a massive undertaking, but it has to be done. We can't just sit back and wait. We got to keep pushing and trying to take those next steps forward, which we are.
And financially, there's challenges for the businesses. There's challenges for the families, of course. The industries themselves, the profit margins are facing really big issues. One of the questions out there to you, Tom, was actually your thoughts on the PPP forgiveness. What's the possibilities with those? And then what you actually, your thoughts on the outcomes of, and maybe this is stepping into the realm of unanswerable, but the potential outcomes of an election and the forgiveness, loan forgiveness, or additional stimulus support.
Sure. Laura, thank you for your comments. I mean, one of the common topics we were discussing was, well, what is the greatest challenge we may be facing going forward here in the next year? And clearly getting the kids back in school and looking out for their future has got to be top of the list. And so thank you for sharing your thoughts there. The forgiveness portal, the rules around forgiveness of these PPP loans, it has been an ever-changing landscape. And so the guidance that is on the SBA's website is the guidance that the banking industry is going to refer you to. Since this isn't a bank program, it's an SBA program, the rules are being managed and changed. I think they're mostly written now. And so the SBA has a frequently asked questions section on their website. WaFd Bank has access to that portal through its website. Many of the other banks in the community have a similar access point. You can go directly to the SBA there. And if you have questions about what qualifies for forgiveness and what does not, take that up with your accountant or with your lawyer. The banking industry is not in a position to answer that type of a question. When it comes to the technical uploading of documents and the actual processing of the forgiveness application, yes, your bank is in a position to help you with that, the technical processing of the documents. So I hope that's clear. And we're all hopeful that there'll be another round of stimulus here. But we're, there's a reason WaFd Bank doesn't issue forecasts. We're one of the few banks our size that does not forecast. Because we'll say, well, you tell us what's going to happen with interest rates in the future and whatnot, and then we'll be happy to tell you what we think might happen there. So we try to make sound decisions based on facts today, stay conservative, and plan for the best here.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it. It'll be interesting to see the outcomes. My thought is that after we get past November 3rd, regardless of who's where, there's going to be some sort of assistance just because the need is great. Interestingly, and I think a lot of people ought to consider this, there's a lot of arguments out there, political arguments. When you really look at this crisis, you look at the federal response, you look at the state response, you look at the local response. And what's been neglected in some of the arguments out there is what's most important to our lives right here is our local response and our state response. And that's the way our system is supposed to work. Federal support, providing whatever resources in order to assist the decision makers at the lowest local level. And we're facing, unfortunately, a challenge right now within our state. We've got cases, but even here in our county, we're still locked down, and we ought to really consider how we approach looking at the facts and going back and to some of our leaders at a local and state level and help them influence them to make the right decisions. The unfortunate part and the reality with the COVID crisis is that a lot of this, again, well-intentioned health professionals and doctors, that their job is to try to say Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. But they are not responsible for the rest of the public policy that does a lot of harm. And they're also not elected officials. Our elected officials in some cases have neglected their responsibility and given it over to unelected people that have a completely different understanding and don't have responsibility. So anyway, I just throw that out there as consideration to the group and to the WBA participants, because there's another opportunity to help organize and look at ways to help address these really fundamental issues within our community. There was a couple other questions. Lori, I'll give you a couple of ones. The first one was USMCA and your thoughts. Obviously, it's pretty quick since we haven't had a lot amount of time to look at it. But your thoughts on how effective that's been, and then if you can talk specifically how the commercial processes for crossing the border are working right now, would be helpful.
Sure. So I think the USMCA has been a huge sigh of relief for many businesses because it's done. Yes, it has to be revisited in 5 years, but the uncertainty is now off the table. So I think trilaterally, many of these businesses can kind of breathe a sigh of relief that at least the rules are now in place. I think there has been a number of hiccups in working through the implementation of the USMCA. It didn't help that it was implemented during this pandemic and unprecedented border management times. So I would imagine if you ask that question to, say, a brokerage firm, they might have a whole litany of complaints and tariff schedule changes. But I think in terms of the business, the kind of broader level business community, it's a good thing that it's done. I think it does bring some advantages to certain sectors in certain places. And we've seen some changes here in our region in terms of what's moving back and forth across the border, but it's really hard right now to decipher, how much of that is attributable to the USMCA and how much of that is attributable to supply chain issues and new trade relationships. We'll be able to look back on this moment and probably tease that out once another year or so has gone by, or at least we have the rest of 2020 data. So I'll use that point to pivot to commercial traffic. So when the bilateral restrictions were put in place back in March, commercial travel was exempted from the very beginning. So truck drivers and commercial cargo is able to move pretty freely across the border. Canada has certain, I won't even say paperwork because it's an app that you can use on your phone. So there's certain sort of entry information that does have to be shared, and truck drivers have to have a quarantine plan in place should they develop symptoms, but they are not subject to Canada's 2-week quarantine, which is really a big part of the issue with the restrictions, because many other cross-border travelers are subject to that 2-week quarantine, which you can imagine makes going back and forth across the border almost completely unfeasible. So we saw a drop in truck volumes back in April and May. They dipped, and then I think they're pretty much almost back to normal levels, although there has been a sustained drop in truck values. So trucks are moving back and forth as much as they were before, or almost as much in our region, but either they're not carrying as many goods or they're carrying low value goods. And again, we can't really tease that out quite yet.
Gerald, I'm going to roll to you with two questions. The first one, I think, is it's going to push the limits of support here for the upcoming November 3rd local elections, primarily, I think, in the 42nd district. But all the candidates that are running right now are claiming that they've got farm support and they're running ads talking about farm support. How does the educated business leader in our community know which of those candidates are actually truly supporting the farm community and which are not? And that's I'll give you, and then I'll have a follow-up question with that, but give you an opportunity to talk about it.
I have to answer the question this way. Safe Family Farming and Whatcom Family Farmers are both nonprofit 501c5. We're not allowed to endorse candidates. So I'm going to be cautious in my response. There is a difference. And the key issue is for us right now, obviously, there's a number of issues involved, but the position that a candidate takes on the adjudication issue, for example, is crucial. Not only because of the importance of that issue for the future of farming, but as a bellwether for looking at other issues as well. And I would say in the 42nd district that there is a pretty clear difference. And I'm just going to leave it at that.
Those people that may have been involved in farming in the past, and yeah, pretty straightforward. Okay, that's good. The second part of the question, the second part is the county and state officials, are they listening to farmers? Or are they listening just to the either, well, I think the question was specifically pseudo-environmentalists, or, is there a dialogue, or do they really care? I'm do this in the best way I can, but. There's not a real simple, clean-cut answer to that. I would say overall, we have an excellent director of the Washington State Department of Agriculture. He's a former ecology, manager, leader, but he is Derek Sanderson, does a great job. He listens to farmers. I think so there certainly are differences in the differences between people in different agencies as well. In terms of concerns, we have particular concerns about the Department of Labor and Industries as it relates to labor issues. And certainly the governor. And I'll just use a specific example. When the COVID situation occurred and the union activists were really leveraging the fears, the legitimate fears that people had for farm workers being essential workers and what they may be exposed to, and attempting to stop all guest workers from coming into the state. When that failed and put the bunk bed rule into place, or attempted to put the bunk bed rule, Rosalinda Guillen sued the state twice because of its unwillingness to impose the bunk bed rule. Nevertheless, when Governor Inslee announced the farm worker protection rules, he thanked Eric Nicholson, who was the vice president of United Farm Workers, for crafting those rules. And it's very clear that the role of these activists who don't have the interests of farm workers in mind, the degree of clout and influence that they have over this administration. That's one of the things that we're really concerned about, and that's why one of the things that we're doing is going to be working very hard to educate voters, particularly in our urban areas, about what farm work is really all about. It's a life-changing opportunity for people. That what they don't understand is that when a guest worker comes from Mexico and works here for 4 or 5 months, they become, and they return, 80% of their pay goes back to their families in Mexico, and they become among the 1% of all wage earners in Mexico. These allow them to, build homes, to send their kids to college. It's a life-changing opportunity, and we need those workers.
So it's really sad to see people who are for their own purposes and own political and union agendas attempting to interfere with this. And what's really sad about that is both our government agencies and our administrative leaders, listening to that without really taking the time to listen to farmers and understand the issues for themselves in more detail.
From personal experience living, in many places abroad, the guest workers that go leave some of the more challenged nations, they have a significant impact on the local communities by the money that they return back. And of course, that's evident in the United States, but the Philippines, the Middle East, and India, Bangladesh, those guest workers that go off and work in other areas. It's an amazingly positive impact. And I agree with you completely that understanding that in our dense urban environment, people lose contact with a lot of the basic things. We just expect food to show up on the shelf, and we expect, toilet paper to be there. And we don't realize how complex the supply chain is and how important every piece is and how much you have, connected through a wide variety of networks that make this all happen for someone that lives in a city that gets utilities and drives down and the cops protect them and keeps their house from being burned down, or the Starbucks down the street.
And just to make a comment on that too, in many respects, it's our own fault, because this campaign against guest workers and farm workers in general has been going on for multiple years. And so, the voters in our cities have been hearing one story, and that is farm workers are abused. They're being called slave labor, that they're underpaid, that they have no protections. None of that is true. But how can you blame the people living in our cities when all they've been hearing through the media and through social media, et cetera, is a completely false picture? That's why even on some of these other issues that have been raised here, unless people are willing to get involved and engage with voters and start educating, we have the results that we see. So it's on us to do that.
Certainly, and organizations like this are a great opportunity to do that. And that brings me back to Pam, because what's happened with the moratoriums, what's happened with Cherry Point, and I'm going to actually have you and Laura respond to this. There's an expectation, actually a talking point, that we can use those facilities out in Cherry Point, with Alcoa closing down and Talco's facility, and all of a sudden we can grow solar panels, or we can start some sort of a biodiesel facility. Oh, wait a second. No, we can't, because of the restrictions. What can we actually do based on the circumstances, based on the restrictions, the moratoriums, the way the policy works right now? How could we effectively use that property in the future? And I'll ask Pam to respond a little bit, and then move it over to Laura.
Well, I referenced at the beginning that BP is on a journey in an energy transition. And, we think we know some things about what that transition will look like, but we don't know everything about what that transition is going to look like. And ultimately, the key is to kind of land policy that doesn't preclude opportunity from even being contemplated. Because if you shut down, this, interim, the beginning part of the transition, you're not going to get to the middle of the transition. You're not going to get to the end of the transition, which is a lower carbon future. And so we have to be very mindful not to interrupt that. But we do see a potential for, lower carbon emissions at the refinery, the kinds of projects that would lower our overall emissions, the kinds of projects that would diversify the fuel mix to include renewables and so forth. Those kind of projects, I think, are within the realm of possibility for these energy companies that are there, specifically ours. I can't speak on behalf of competitors, but our company has indicated it's on a journey here and has these aspirations and is willing to make investment in this way. So, I mean, one would hope that renewables projects are entirely in scope, and we worked hard with the Planning Commission to try to craft a policy that made sure that renewables wouldn't necessarily be subject to the same kind of conditional use criteria, for example, that other kinds of projects would. I think that's an important component. I think the community wants to see that kind of investment in Whatcom County, and I hope that we're able to protect that as we go through this code revision. You know, going back to a little bit of what Gerald was saying, I absolutely think that he nailed it right on the head when he said to get involved, because the only reason we're able to even be at the table at the moment on this code revision is because of people who've gotten engaged. I know the businesses have been engaged, but beyond that, the community really got engaged. And you know, our employees, our contractors showed up at all 10 moratorium renewals. WBA members came and made comment, had picked up the phone, had sent emails, had showed up for county council meetings and so forth to express their concerns. And so it's really the public that has flagged this as an area that's important to get right. And I think that kind of engagement is critical in order to get the kind of policy outcomes that we want to see. And so I think as we look forward to what kind of businesses, would come to Cherry Point, who would be attracted to do business here? Well, pick up the phone and call your elected representative and tell them that you want to make sure that that we're open for business, and the kinds of policies that the county is contemplating are very important to get right. I think that's what it comes down to.
Thank you. Laura?
Yes, and I will strongly echo what Pam has said. If companies can go anywhere, why would they, come to a place where they're just going to get beat up at every turn? We've lived in other places where when you call the government, they answer the phone and they say, "How can we help you?" Because they understand that they're there to serve the citizens, and business owners being part of that. As far as Alcoa goes, I will state, and I appreciate that we had great outpouring from the community when we announced the curtailment of our facility. Lots of Whatcom County businesses were very interested and willing to talk and take some of our folks and employ them, which was a load off of many of us, and we appreciate that, to know that they were going to good places. But Alcoa, we're still here. It's still, Intalco is still our property. We still own it, and we will still continue to evaluate what is a good outcome, what's a mutually beneficial outcome for Alcoa and also for the community, as we go forward. And it has been very funny. I know that there's a lot of folks out there who are possibly making statements about what they would do with Intalco and with our property, as though we kind of just shut the door and took off, but we're still here. We do still have some employees. We're maintaining our permitting. As I said before, curtailed is not closed. So we're still engaged in the community and talking with our economic development folks, and just keeping that dialogue open as we go forward. But again, echoing what Pam said, if you are looking again to try and reinvest, it's very expensive to restart a smelter. And if we are talking to our corporate folks and saying, so, let's have that dialogue, and they say, tell us again, how is that moratorium going? What is your county council doing around shoreline management? And what about the Department of Natural Resources and the aquatic lands lease? And, there are layers upon layers of issues that we have to constantly evaluate and stay really on top of, and how they impact our business potentially, in the future. So it's, there's a lot really to keep an eye on. And as a business owner, business interest, if you're looking across your portfolio and you have other options, and those are saying, what can we do for you? We would love to have you, expand your business or hire more people. you know, it's a natural inclination to go where the things are easier.
Yeah, I will add one more thing, and I've heard some voices in the community say, you know, we'd love to attract, you know, green kinds of energy companies, you know, solar or wind power or hydrogen, and I mean it's all interrelated, and I've heard folks say it in the context that they want to pivot away from the existing industries that we have at Cherry Point. But I think I would like to just encourage folks to also consider, you know, if those are the things that they want, the companies that are at Cherry Point already are very likely to be the ones that are engaged in those kinds of businesses in the future, if they're given the kind of flexibility to adapt their companies to the changing marketplace.
Yeah, that seems to me to be the most important aspect of it. You have to be able to turn a profit to do investment in order to do experimentation, in order to create some of these energy, you know, alternative energy sources. And of course, we know that we're not going to do it through wind. We're not going to do it through solar alone. There's a lot of different options that need to be worked at, and you have to make a profit to do it. And for business, I don't care which business you are, you have to have some predictability and a return on investment in order to have a business. And we sometimes forget that. In fact, I think in our community, which is a really important aspect of the WBA, spreading the word that, you know, it's not big corporate, you know, almost everybody's in some corporation, you know, even my LLC, me, myself, you know, there's just there's a lot of small corporations out there. And it's not the big evil corporation. We all work somehow interrelated, and we need that predictability. We've got to be able to make a living, and we need the business environment to be able to do that. You've got to have some sort of profitability, and you've got to be able to, you know, secure the resources to be able to do that. There's one last question I'm going to give, you know, any of the people out there in the audience that are listening, if you have a final question, we're going to be closing up in a few minutes. The one question, and I think it's back to you, Tom, and you may have answered it, saying that the SBA has responsibility for the PPP policies. But the question was basically, do you have an idea for a timeline or any guidelines that may impact the rounds of funding if they come?
None whatsoever. I think we are all waiting anxiously, and hopefully a silver lining, you know, after this election, as we get a little more bipartisanship going forward, because the nation has a collective need, and so let's sort of assume the grown-ups will take control here and onward.
Any other questions? Go ahead and put it up there. I'm going to just say that, you know, I've worked in the government for many, many years prior to coming out and getting involved in our community. And it takes a long time to move that big, giant ship in another direction. And it actually surprises me how effectively and how rapidly certain things happened with this, you know, with the support from the federal government. And you know, it's maybe a little bit mind-boggling the amount of money that went into it. And of course, you throw that much money at anything, there's going to end up being some corruption and some problems. And of course, we're going to carry a debt for a while that we have to somehow sort and figure out. But
Jim, the one thing I will say is that the pipes are built. So the banks have built the connections into the SBA portal. The kinks have been worked out. We've finally smoothed out all of the rules. So when there's another round of PPP funding, it should be much, much smoother than what we had before.
That's fantastic. And of course, you know, most of us know the impact with the unemployment insurance here in Washington State and what happened with some of those issues. And we know that some of the you know, some of the things that drive the statistics on COVID are based on how much money that certain people and industries, insurance industries, for example, get based on the number of approved cases. So my hope is that as we get closer towards away from the political dialogue and back into the real dialogue of how we help our community and make good decisions, that our governance and our policymakers pass this November 3rd issue, whoever's running it will make wise decisions on where we go and what we do next. Again, think it took a while with the TARP money and the initial stimulus in 2009, and we never actually used all of it. I don't know if we've used all the money now. I think Congress is concerned that some of it's still sitting there. So how effectively that's done. And I do know that here in our own county, in our own local government, they hadn't even figured out ways to use some of the money that's out there. So we need to help shape those dialogues, help shape that information. The WBA is specifically here to do that. And what we've got to really do is get more voices involved and provide actual policy-based information to our leaders. I think I got one more point out there that I'm going to make, and we need more football bipartisanship. So, you know, as a Seattle Seahawks, I must say bipartisanship here, I'm not a Seahawks fan. I'm going to be open to all our folks out there. I'm a Niner fan, so the evil.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I know you're all going to delete now and hang up. But I do want, we're approaching the end here. I want to thank the panelists for your time. We've spent almost 2 hours now, and then your preparation time. Most importantly, you're leaders in our community right now. Your industries and your businesses and what you represent and the information, Lori, that you provide is essential to our future. It's essential for our businesses to understand the Whatcom Business Alliance. The goal with the WBA is to provide information, provide support, a place to gather in order to help us all prosper and to do much better in an environment that has been challenging. And we need that. We need the strength. I've really got to thank Tom and the WAFED for sponsoring this now. I think this is the 4th year. Usually we're in a common space and we're all together, and we hope very much that next year we are all in that position again. In fact, I hope we'll be able to do that sooner than that. But WAFED and their sponsorship and really appreciate you stepping out to do this. I want everyone to know that this will be posted on the videotape of the entire event. You can pass it to your friends, family, and anybody else that wants to gain a little bit of knowledge. Hopefully not to our enemies that will use it against us, but actually I think you all did a fantastic job to be able to provide good information out there with factual background. So it'll be available on the WBA website, Facebook, and social media apps. So most importantly, we want to thank the members of the WBA and want to encourage you to keep your employees informed of the issues that are affecting us and get them involved. This November 3rd is a very essential day for all of us. Ballots in Whatcom County have been coming in slowly. People need to get involved, and we need to ensure that people are making decisions based on their best interest, on the best interest of our community and the stability of our nation. I'm a dedicated, loyal supporter of the Constitution of the United States, and I want to see it sustain itself and continue on long into the future for free speech and free ideas, and to be able to do things like this together. So if there's nothing else, anybody want to close up with any closing comments? We are just about at the end of our time.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you all for coming out once again, and thank all the members out there in the community. Please reach out, get more people involved, understanding what's happening, and get them involved with the WBA. Let's get more members in this community. So thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to actually host this, but also for the people in the back that have been making this happen. Certainly Whitney and Dustin, and of course the whole member organization as we continue to push forward on this. So
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Enjoyed
Thanks
it.
all.
Have a great evening.
Thanks.